Hi guys, we are starting chapter 8, Land of Winter. Aye, she's got first sight, sure enough, said William's voice behind Tiffany as she stared into the world of the Queen. She's seeing what's really there. Snow stretched away under a sky so dirty white that Tiffany might have been standing inside a ping-pong ball. Only black trunks and scribbly branches of the trees here and there told her where the land stopped and the sky began. Those, and of course, there were hoof prints. They stretched away toward the forest of black trees, bowed with snow. The cold was like little needles all over her skin. She looked down and saw the Nac-Macfeagle pouring through the gate, waist deep in snow. They spread out without speaking. Some of them had drawn their swords. They weren't laughing or joking now. They were watchful. "Right then," said Rob Anybody. "Well done. You wait here for us, and we'll get your wee brother back. No problemo." "I'm coming too," said Tiffany. "Nay, the Caelda doesna." "Well, this one diz," said Tiffany, shivering. I mean does. He's my brother. And where are we?" Rob Anybody glanced up at the pale sky. There was no sun anywhere. "You're here noo," he said. "So maybe there's no harm in telling ye. This is what ye call the fairyland." "Fairyland? No, it's not. I've seen pictures. Fairyland it's all trees and flowers and sunshine and tinkliness. Dumpy little babies in romper suits with horns. People with wings and weird people. I've seen pictures." "It isn't always like this," said Rob Anybody shortly, "and ye canna come with, because ye have no weapon, mistress." "What happened to my frying pan?" said Tiffany. Something bumped against her heels. She looked around and she saw Not As Big As Medium-Sized Jock But Bigger Than Wee Jock holding up a pan triumphantly. "Okay, so you have a pan," said Rob Anybody. "But what you need here is a sort of thunderbolt iron. That's the, official weapon for invading fairyland." "I know how to use the pan," said Tiffany, "and I'm—" "Incoming!" yelled Daft Woolly. Tiffany saw a line of black dots in the distance, and she felt someone climb up her back and stand on her head. "It's the black dogs, Not As Big As Medium-Sized Jock But Bigger Than Wee Jock announced. "Dozens of 'em, big man." "Oh, we'll never outrun the dogs," Tiffany cried, grabbing her pan. "Dinna need to," said Rob Anybody. "We got the Gonigal with us this time. Ye might like to stick your fingers in your ears, though." William, with his eyes fixed on the approaching pack, was unscrewing some of the pipes from his mouse pipes and putting them in a bag that he carried, hanging from his shoulder. The dogs were much closer now. Tiffany could see the razor teeth and the burning eyes. Slowly, William took out some much shorter, smaller pipes that had a silvery look to them, and he screwed them into place. He had the look of someone who wasn't going to rush. Tiffany gripped the handle of her pan. The dogs weren't barking. It would have been slightly less scary if they were. William swung the mouse pipes under his arm and blew into one until the bag bulged. "I shall play," he announced, as the dogs got close enough for Tiffany to see the drool. "That firm favorite, the king under water." As one pixie, the Nac-Macfeagle dropped their swords and put their hands over their ears. William put his mouthpiece to his lips, tapped his foot once or twice, and, as a dog gathered itself to leap at Tiffany, began to play. A lot of things happened at more or less the same time. All of Tiffany's teeth started to buzz. The pan vibrated in her hands and dropped onto the snow. The dog in front of her went cross-eyed, and instead of leaping, tumbled forward. The Grimhounds paid no attention to the pixies. They howled, they spun around, they tried to bite their own tails. They stumbled and ran into one another. The line of panting death broke into dozens of desperate animals, twisting and writhing and trying to escape with their own skins. The snow was melting in a circle around William, whose cheeks were now red with effort. Steam was rising. He took the pipe from his mouth. The grim hounds, struggling in the slush, raised their heads. And then, as one dog, they put their tails between their legs and they ran like greyhounds back across the snow. "Well, there, ken we're here noo," said Rob Anybody, wiping tears from his eyes. Again?" said Tiffany, touching her teeth to check that they were all still there. "Oh, he played the notes o' pain," said Rob Anybody. "You canna hear 'em 'cause they're pitched too high, but the doggies can. Hurts 'em in their heads. Now, we better get moving before she sends something else." "The Queen sent them? But they're like something out of nightmares," said Tiffany. "Oh, aye," said Rob Anybody. "That's where she got 'em." Tiffany looked at William the Gonigal. He was calmly replacing the pipes. He saw her staring at him, and he looked up and winked. "The Knack McFeegle take our music very seriously," he said, and then he nodded at the snow near Tiffany's foot. And there was a sugary yellow teddy bear in the snow made of 100% artificial additives. And the snow all around Tiffany was melting away. 2 pixies carried Tiffany easily. She skimmed across the snow and the clan was running beside her. No sun in the sky. Even on the dullest days you could generally see where the sun was, but not here. And there was something else that was quite strange, something she couldn't quite give a name to. This didn't feel like a real place. She didn't know why she felt like that, but something was wrong with the horizon. It looked close enough to touch, but that was silly. But things just weren't finished. Like the trees in the forest where they were headed, for example. A tree is a tree, she thought. Close up or far away, it's a tree. It has barks and branches and roots, and you know they're there, even if the tree is so far away it's just a blob. But the trees here, though, they were different. She had a strong feeling that they were just blobs, and they were growing the roots and twigs and other details as she got closer, as if they were thinking, "Quick, someone's coming! Look real!" It was like being in a painting where the artist hadn't bothered much with the things in the distance, but quickly brushed a little bit of realness anywhere you were looking. The air was cold and dead, like the air in old cellars. The light grew dimmer as they reached the forest, and in between the trees it became blue and eerie. No birds, she thought. "Stop," she said. The pixies lowered her to the ground, but Rob Anybody said, "No, we shouldn't hang around here too long. Heads up, lads." Tiffany lifted out the toad. It blinked in the snow. "Oh, Shope," he said. "This is not good. I should be hibernating. Why is everything here so strange?" "Can't help you there," said the toad. "I just see snow. I just see ice. I just see freezing to death. I'm listening to my inner toad here. It's not that cold. It feels cold to me." The toad shut his eyes. Tiffany sighed and lowered him into her pocket. "I'll tell you where you are," said Rob Anybody, his eyes still scanning the blue shadows. "You ken them wee bitty bugs that cling onto the sheeps and suck theirselves full of blood and then drop off again? Well, the whole world is like one of those." "You mean like a tick? Like a parasite or a vampire?" "Oh, aye. Floats around until it finds a place that's weak on one world where no one's paying attention, and it opens a door. And then the Queen sends in her folk for the stealing, you ken, raiding the barns and rustling the cattle." "Oh, we used to like stealing the beasties," said the daft Woolly. "Woolly," said Rob Anybody, pointing his sword. "You ken when I said there was times you should think before opening your big fat gob?" "Aye, Rob." "Well, that was one of those times." Rob turned and looked up at Tiffany rather bashfully. "Aye, we was wild champion robbers for the Queen," he said. "People wouldn't even go hunting with fear of us little men. But 'twas never enough for her. She always wanted more. But we said it's not right to steal an old lady's only pig, or the food from them that dinna have enough to eat. A Feegle has no worries about stealing a golden cup from a rich big job, ye ken, but taking away the cup, and old man kept his false teeth in that made them feel ashamed. They had said, the Knack McFeegle would fight and steal, certainly, but who wanted to fight the weak or steal from the poor? Tiffany listened, and at the end of the shadowy wood, to the story of a little world where nothing grew, where no sun shone, and where everything had to come from somewhere else. It was a world that just took, and it gave nothing back except fear. It raided, and people learned to stay in bed when they heard strange noises at night, because if anyone gave her trouble, the queen would control their dreams. Tiffany couldn't quite pick up how she did this, but that's where things like the Grimhounds and the Headless Horseman came from. These dreams were just more real. The queen could take dreams and make them more solid. You could step inside them and vanish, and you didn't just wake up when the monsters caught you. The queen's people wouldn't just take food, they'd take people too. Like pipers, said William the Gonigal. Fairies can't make music, ye ken, so she'll steal a man away just for the music he makes. And she takes children, said Tiffany. Aye, but your wee brother's not the first, said Rob Anybody. There's not a lot of fun and laughter here, ye ken. She thinks she's good with children. The old Kelda, she said she wouldn't harm him, said Tiffany. That is true, isn't it? You could read the Knack McFeegle like a book, and it would be a very big, very simple book, with pictures of Spot the dog and a big red ball, and maybe one or two short sentences on each page. What they were thinking turned up right on their faces, and now they were all wearing a look that said, Cravens, I hope she didna ask us the question we dunna want to answer. That is true, isn't it? Said Tiffany. Oh, aye, said Rob Anybody slowly. She didn't lie to get you there. Now the queen'll try to be kind to him, but she doesn't know how. Well, she's an elf. They're not very good at thinking of other people. Well, what will happen to him if I can't get him back? And again there was that, we dunna like the way this is going look. I said, Tiffany repeated. I dare say she'll send him back in due time, said William, and he will not be any older. Nothing grows old here. Nothing grows, nothing at all. So he'll be all right? Rob Anybody made a noise in his throat. It sounded like a voice that was trying to say aye, but was being argued with the brain that knew the answer was actually no. Tell me what you're not telling me, said Tiffany. Daft Woolly was the first to speak. That's a lot of stuff, he said. For example, the melting point of lead is... Time passes slower the deeper you go into this place, said Rob Anybody quickly. Years will pass like days. The queen'll get tired of the wee lad after a couple of months maybe. But that's a couple of months here, ye ken, where the time is slow and heavy. But when he comes back into the mortal world, well, you'll be an old lady, or maybe you'll have died. So if you have any bairns of your own, you'd better tell him to watch out for a wee sticky little lad wandering around the hills shouting about sweeties, 'cause that'll be their Uncle Wentworth. And that wouldn't be the worst of it neither. You live in dreams for too long and you go mad. You just never wake up properly. You can never get the hang of reality again. Tiffany stared at him. It's happened before, said William. I will get him back, said Tiffany quietly. And we don't doubt it, said Rob Anybody. And where you go, we'll go with ya. The Knack McFeegle are afeard of nothing. And a cheer went up, but it seemed to Tiffany that the blue shadows just sucked away all the sound. Aye, nothing except in lawyers and Daft Willie tried to say before Rob managed to shut him up. Tiffany turned her back to the line of hoofprints and she began to walk. The snow squeaked unpleasantly underfoot. She went a little way, watching the trees get realer as she approached them. and then she looked around. All the Knack McFeagle were creeping along behind her. Rob Anybody gave her a cheery nod, and all the footprints had become holes in the snow, with grass showing through. The trees began to annoy her. The way things changed was more frightening than any monster. You could hit a monster, but you can't really hit a forest, and she really wanted to hit something. She stopped and scraped some snow away from the base of a tree, and just for a moment there was nothing but grayness where it had been. As she watched, the bark grew down to where the snow was. Then it just stayed there, pretending as if it had been there the whole time. It was a lot more worrying than the Grimhounds. They were just monsters. They could be beaten. But this was frightening. She was second thinking again. She felt the fear grow, and she felt her stomach become just a red-hot lump. She felt her elbows begin to sweat. But it just wasn't connected. She watched herself being frightened, so that meant that this was still a part of herself, the watching part, and that just wasn't. The trouble was, it was being carried on legs that were, so it had to be very careful. And that was where everything went wrong. Fear gripped her all at once. She was in a strange world with monsters and being followed by hundreds of little blue thieves. There were black dogs and headless horsemen and monsters in the river. Sheep were whizzing backwards across fields. There was voices under her bed, and the terror took her. But because she was Tiffany, she ran toward it, raising her pan. She just had to get through this forest, find the queen, get her brother, and leave this place. Somewhere behind her, voices started to shout. She woke up. There was no snow, but there was the whiteness of her bedsheet and the plaster ceiling of her bedroom. She stared at it for a while, then leaned down and she peered under her bed. But there was nothing down there but the gazunder. And when she flung open the door to her doll's house, there was no one inside but the 2 toy soldiers and teddy bear and a headless dolly. The walls were solid, the floor creaked, as it always did. Her slippers were the same as they always were, old, comfortable, some of the pink fluff worn off. She stood in the middle of the floor and said very quietly, "Is anybody here?" Sheep baaed in the distant hillside, but they probably hadn't heard her. The door squeaked open, and the cat, Ratbag, came in. He rubbed up against her legs, purring like a distant thunderstorm, and then went and curled up on her bed. Tiffany got dressed thoughtfully, daring the room to do something strange. When she got downstairs, breakfast was cooking. Her mother was very busy at the sink. Tiffany darted out through the scullery and into the dairy. She scrambled on hands and knees around the floor, peering under the sink and behind cupboards. "You can come out now, honestly," she said. No one came. She was alone in the room. She'd often been alone in that room, and she had enjoyed it. It was almost her private territory. But now somehow it was just too empty, too clean. When she wandered back into the kitchen, her mother was still standing by the sink washing dishes. But a plate of steaming porridge had been put down in the one set place at the table. "I'll make some more butter today," said Tiffany carefully, sitting down. "I might as well, while we're getting all this milk." Her mother nodded and put a plate on the drain board beside the sink. "I haven't done anything wrong, have I?" asked Tiffany, and her mother shook her head. Tiffany sighed. And then she woke up, and it was all just a dream. And that was just about the worst ending that you could have to any story. But it had all seemed so real. I mean, she could actually remember the smoky smell in the Pixie's cave and the way... Now, who was that? Oh, yes, he'd been called Rob Anybody. The way that Rob Anybody had always been so nervous about talking to her. That was really strange, she thought. Ratbag had rubbed up against her. He'd sleep on her bed if he could get away with it, but during the day he kept well out of Tiffany's way. Now that's odd. There was a rattling sound near the mantelpiece. The china shepherdess on Granny's shelf was moving sideways of its own accord, and as Tiffany watched with her porridge spoon halfway to her mouth, it slid off and it smashed onto the floor. and the rattling went on. Now it was coming from the big oven. She could see the door actually shaking on its hinges. She turned to her mother, and she saw her put another plate down by the sink. It wasn't being held in a hand. And the oven door burst off the hinges and slid across the floor. "Dinna eat that porridge!" Knack McFeegle spilled out of the room, hundreds of them, pouring across the tiles. The walls were shifting, the floor moved, and now the thing turned around at the sink, and it wasn't even human, it was just stuff. No more human than a gingerbread man, gray as old dough, changing shape as it lumbered toward Tiffany. The pixies surged past her in a flurry of snow. She looked up at the thing's tiny black eyes. The scream came from somewhere deep inside, and there was no second thought, there was no first thought, just a scream. It seemed to spread out as it left Tiffany's mouth until it became just a black tunnel in front of her. And as she fell into it, she heard, in all the commotion behind her, "Who do you think you're looking at, pal? Cravens, but you're gonna get such a kickin'." Tiffany opened her eyes. She was now lying on damp ground in the snowy, gloomy wood. The pixies were watching her very closely, but she saw that there were others behind them staring outward into the gloom among the tree trunks. There was stuff in those trees, lumps of stuff, and it was gray and it hung there like cloth. She turned her head and saw William standing beside her, looking at her with concern. "That was a dream, wasn't it?" she said. "Well, no," said William. "It was, ye ken, and there again it wasna." Tiffany sat up suddenly, causing the pixies to leap back. "But that thing was in it, and you all came out of the oven," she said. "You were in my dream. What was that creature?" William McGonagall stared at her as if trying to make up his mind. "That is what we call a drone," he said. "Nothing here really belongs here, remember? Everything is a reflection from outside, and something kidnapped from another world, or maybe something the Queen had made out of magic. And it was hiding in the trees, and well, you were going so fast you didn't see it. You ken spiders?" "Well, of course." "Well, spiders spin webs. Drones spin dreams. It's easy in this place. The world you come from is nearly real, and this place is nearly unreal. So it's almost a dream anyway. And the drone makes the dream for you with a trap in it. If you eat anything in that dream, you'll never want to leave it." He looked as though Tiffany should have been quite impressed. "What's in it for the drone?" she asked. "It likes watching dreams. It has fun watching you have fun, and it'll watch you eating dream food until you starve to death, and then the drone will eat you. Not right away, of course. It'll wait until you've gone a wee bit runny, because it hasn't any teeth." "So how can anyone get out?" "Well, the best way is to find the drone," said Rob Anybody. "It'll be in the dream with you in disguise. Then you just give it a good kicking." "By kicking you mean—" "Oh, chopping its head off generally works." Now, Tiffany thought, I am impressed. I wish I weren't. "So this is fairyland," she said. "Aye, you could say it's the bit the tourists dinna see," said William. "And you did well. You were fighting it. You knew it wasn't right." Tiffany remembered that friendly cat and the falling shepherdess. She had been trying to send messages to herself. She should have listened. "Thank you for coming after me," she said meekly. "How did you know?" "Ah, we can generally find our way into anywhere, even a dream," said William, smiling. "We were stealing folk after all." A piece of the drone fell out of the tree and flopped onto the snow. "One of them, it won't get me again," said Tiffany. "Aye, I believe you. You have murder in your eyes," said William, with a touch of admiration. "If I was a drone, I'd be pretty fearful noo if I had a brain. There'll be more of them, mark ya, and some of them are cunning, and the Queen uses them as guards." I won't be fooled, said Tiffany, remembering the horror of the moment when that thing lumbered around, changing shape. It was worse because it was in her house. It was her place. And she felt real terror as the shepherdess thing crashed across the kitchen. But the anger had been there too. It was invading her place. The thing wasn't just trying to kill her. It was insulting her. William was watching her. "Aye, you're looking mighty fierce," he said. "You must love your wee brother a faced all of these monsters for him." And Tiffany couldn't stop her thoughts. I don't love him. I know I don't. He's just so sticky, and he can't keep up, and I have to spend too much time looking after him. He's always screaming for things. I can't talk to him. He just wants all the time. But her second thinking said, "He's mine. He's my place, my home, my brother. And how dare anything take what's mine?" She'd been brought up not to be selfish. She knew she wasn't, not the way that people meant. She tried to think of other people. She never took the last slice of bread. But this was a different feeling. She wasn't being brave or noble or kind. She was doing this because it had to be done, because there was no way to not do it. So she thought of Granny Aking's light weaving slowly across the downs on freezing, sparkly nights or in storms like a raging war, saving lambs from the creeping frost or the rams from the precipice. She froze and struggled and tramped through the night for those idiot sheep that never said thank you, and they would all be just as stupid tomorrow, and they would get into the same trouble all over again. And she did it because not doing it was unthinkable. There had been the time where they met the peddler and the donkey in the lane. It was a small donkey, and it could hardly be seen under the pack piled on it, and the peddler was thrashing it because it had fallen over. Tiffany cried, seeing that, and Granny had looked at her and then said something to Thunder and Lightning. The peddler had stopped when he heard the growling. The sheepdogs had taken up positions on either side of the man, so he couldn't quite see them both. He raised his stick as if to hit Lightning, and Thunder's growl grew louder. "I'd advise you not to do that," said Granny. He wasn't a stupid man. The eyes of the dogs were like steel balls. He lowered his arm. "Now throw down that stick," said Granny. The man did so, dropping it into the dust as though it had suddenly grown red hot. Granny Aking walked forward, and she picked it up. Tiffany remembered it was a willow twig, long and whippy. And suddenly, so fast that her hand was a blur, Granny sliced it across the man's face, leaving 2 long red marks. He began to move, and some desperate thought must have saved him, because now the dogs were almost frantic, waiting for a command to leap. "It hurts, doesn't it?" said Granny, pleasantly. "Now, I know who you are, and I reckon you know who I am. You sell pots and pans, and they ain't bad, as I recall. But if I put out the word, you'll have no business in my hills. You be told. Better to feed your beast than whip it. Do you hear me?" With his eyes shut and his hands shaking, the man nodded. "That'll do," said Granny Aking, and instantly the dogs became once more 2 ordinary sheepdogs who came and sat on either side of her with their tongues hanging out. Tiffany watched the man unpack some of the load and strap it onto his own back, and then, with great care, urged the donkey on along the road. Granny watched him go while filling her pipe with Jolly Sailor. And then, as she lit it, she said, as if the thought had just occurred to her, "Them as can do has to do for them as can't, and someone has to speak up for them that have no voice." Tiffany thought, "Is that what being a witch is? Well, that's not what I expected. When do all the good bits happen?" And then she stood up. "Let's keep going," she said. "Aren't you tired?" said Rob. "We're going to keep going." "Aye? Well, she's probably headed for her place beyond the wood. If we didn't carry her, it'll take a couple hours." "I'll walk." The memory of the huge face in the drome was trying to come back into her mind, but her fury gave it no space. "Where's my frying pan? Thank you. Let's go." She set off through the strange trees. The hoof prints almost glowed in the gloom. Here and there other tracks crossed them, tracks that could have been bird feet, rough round footprints that could have been made by anything, squiggly lines that a snake might make if there were such things as snow snakes. The pixies were running in line with her on either side. Even with the edge of the fury dying away, it was hard looking at things here without her head aching. Things that seemed far off got closer much too quickly, and the trees changed shape as she passed them. "Almost unreal," William had said. "Nearly a dream." Well, this world didn't have enough reality in it for the distances and shapes to work properly. Once again, the magic artist was painting madly. If she looked hard at a tree, it changed, and it would become more tree-like and less like something drawn by Wentworth with his eyes shut. "This is a made-up world," thought Tiffany. "It's almost like a story. The trees don't have to be very detailed, because who looks at a tree in a story?" She stopped in a small clearing, and she stared hard at a tree. And it seemed to know it was being watched. It became more real. The bark roughened, and proper twigs grew on the ends of the branches. The snow was melting around her feet, too. Although melting may have been the wrong word. It was just disappearing, leaving leaves and grass. If I was a world that didn't have enough reality to go around, Tiffany thought, then snow would be quite handy. Doesn't take a lot of effort, it's just white stuff. Everything looks white and simple. But I can make it complicated. I'm more real than this place. She heard a buzzing overhead and looked up. Suddenly the air was filling with small people, smaller than the Feagle, with wings like dragonflies, and there was a golden glow around them. And Tiffany, entranced, reached out a hand. At the same moment, what felt like the entire clan of the Nakmek Feagle was on her back and sent her sliding into a snowdrift. When she struggled out, the clearing was now a battlefield. The pixies were jumping and slashing at the flying creatures, which buzzed all around them like wasps. As she stared, two of them dived onto Rob Anybody and lifted him off his feet by his hair. He rose in the air, yelling and struggling. Tiffany leaped up and grabbed him around the waist, flailing at the creatures with her other hand. They let go of the pixie and dodged easily, zipping through the air as fast as hummingbirds. One of them bit her on the finger before buzzing away. Somewhere, a voice went, "Oh!" Rob struggled in Tiffany's grip. "Quick, put me down!" he yelled. "There's gonna be poetry!"